Hi, hello everybody. It's Mary Rowe, President and CEO of CUI, the Canadian Urban Institute. Thanks for joining us for City Talk. It's noon here in Toronto and it's noon in the nation's capital, where we are very, very pleased to have Mayor Watson join us. He's got a busy packed schedule, as all the mayors do, and on Fridays it's kind of a Meet the Mayor's Day, one-on-one conversations for us at CUI. So Mayor Watson, thank you for joining us. This broadcast originates in Toronto, which is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And it's now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people from across Turtle Island who find their home here. We also acknowledge Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, which was signed by the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Anishinaabeg nations. We're at a particularly difficult time of reckoning, I think, in urban Canada, as in urban environments around the world, coming to terms with the legacies of systemic racism and all the challenges that have been in place for decades, centuries. At CUI, we're interested in how the built environment, the spatial city, actually helps fulfill the promise of cities to be accessible for everyone, and we are taking us seriously and confronting our own contribution to the ways in which the structures in our cities have been discriminatory and continue to be. And as we look at the impact of COVID, we can see that it is disproportionately affecting people of color, and a number of systems that are in place put people of color at risk. And we're seeing all the implications of that. So we have these conversations cognizant of that's the context in which we find ourselves, and how are we going to reckon with that, and how are we going to reconcile ourselves to that, and then how do we actually address it going forward. So we're interested to have Mayor Watson join us and share his own views and struggles as the City of Ottawa has been coping with this extraordinary crisis of COVID, and then all the other pre-existing challenges that our cities experienced before, including the ones I just referred to, a number of others, and how is that all manifesting. For people who are coming joining our chat, it's always great if you let us know where you're signing in from. Mayor Watson, people come from across the country, so it's always interesting for us to see who's on. When you put a comment in the chat box, folks, please direct it to all panelists and everyone. You'll see there's a toggle switch at the bottom, and we'd love to hear where you're watching from. And you can pose questions here for the mayor, and you can ask questions of each other too. We find that the chat box is a very vibrant place for discourse. We record these conversations, so people that missed the session with the mayor today can watch it at their leisure some other point. We also published 5 or 6 takeaways that we think are the most, some interesting points that the mayor will raise. And then we also published this chat. So just be aware that if you say something in the chat, it stays in the chat to be seen. So Mayor Watson, let's start with you. If we can you just give us a picture of what your experience has been in Ottawa over the last 12, 13 weeks? What are you seeing, and what have you been struggling with?
Well, first of all, Mary, thank you very much, and the Institute, for allowing me some time to talk to you and other Canadians about COVID-19 and the challenges that we face as a society, and obviously the anti-Black racism element as well that has come at roughly the same time. From the COVID-19 point of view, I'm very, very proud of our city's response. The work that our public health unit, Dr. Vera Etches, has been unbelievable in terms of her performance, competency, compassion, passion about doing whatever we can to protect as many people as possible. In Ottawa, we've sadly had 248 residents pass away as a result of COVID-19, and we have about 1,985 cases. Our numbers are starting to go down. We're starting to see some positive aspects to the numbers, which is good, but we're still, obviously, like every other major city in the country, not out of the woods. We set up very early on, after COVID reached our city, 2 task forces. One is a human needs task force dealing with the most vulnerable people in our community, and the other is the economic recovery task force, because we recognize that virtually every business in the city was going to be shut down. Our largest employer, the Federal Public Service, were going to be operating by and large mostly from home, and it would have a tremendous impact both on the short term, immediate term, on our economy and jobs, as well as on the medium and long term. So on the economic Recovery Task Force, we gathered together leaders from the business community, the head of the BIAs, the Board of Trade, the Regroupement des Gens d'Affaires, which is the Francophone equivalent of the Board of Trade, Ottawa Festival Network, Ottawa Tourism, as well as a number of other organizations, our film commissioner and music industry leaders, to put together an action plan that would help our businesses as best as possible. As you know, at the municipal level, we don't have the ability to financially subsidize businesses. We're not allowed to bonus, as it's called in the Municipal Act, but there are some things that we can do. So we offered a deferral of property tax payments. Normally they would be, the final bill would go out this month, and this property tax deferral for those people who apply for it will see their taxes paid in October instead of June. So it gives them a few months of breathing space to try to deal with some cash flow issues. We haven't had a large take up on that, but I think it's probably a couple thousand people, and that will help those businesses. And we're telling the landlords, you'll only be eligible for it if you pass along the benefit to your retail tenants. And of course, the same with people living in apartments and so on. Secondly, we also put together a toolkit, an economic recovery toolkit that gives businesses all of the rules and regulations on the 3 levels of government as to what has to be done in order to open your business. It's been received very, very well. It's been circulated province-wide, and I know there was a national table on business recovery that saw our toolkit, and they said it was the best one they've seen in the country. So that is available to everyone if you go to the Ottawa website, ottawa.ca. We've also instituted a buy local campaign, because obviously there's some businesses that are open and they have curbside delivery or pickup or takeout. So we're encouraging people to go and buy gift certificates, because it will help the business in the short term with cash flow, keep more people employed, and then those people use those gift certificates maybe a few months down the road, give them out as Christmas gifts or whatever. So that's helped a number of businesses. And finally, we've been working with businesses that have been pivoting to new products to help in the fight against COVID-19. We have a distillery, for instance, that's converted their alcohol making efforts to hand sanitizer. We have businesses that have started manufacturing screens and plexiglass dividers and so on, and doing whatever we can to help those businesses who in turn then are able to hire back people and get them back to work. So that's been the economic task force. There's a number of other initiatives, but we meet every week via conference call, and I'm very much appreciative of the business community working hand in hand with us. On the Human Needs Task Force, this is obviously dealing with the most vulnerable, those people who are, for instance, homeless or living in shelters. When you're told to self-isolate and you live in a shelter, that's very difficult. So we've opened 2 self-isolation centers in areas of the city that would have the largest percentage of people in shelters or living on the streets. And we've opened a 3rd shelter outside of the downtown core for those people who want to get away from the crowdedness of the downtown core. We've also been working with our social service partners to identify those families, particularly women and children, to take them out of the shelter system and provide them with hotel rooms. So that's been something that we've been working on, and I think we have now a couple hundred people in various hotel rooms in the city. They're working on a number of other different initiatives, ensuring that we have the necessary funds available to provide food and shelter. And I've personally been involved with some fundraising initiatives that we launched a fundraising initiative for the Ottawa Food Bank with one of the COO of one of our great success stories, Shopify, here in Ottawa. And together with others, we raised about $310,000 in 48 hours to provide funding for the food bank, because we know that the food bank demand has gone through the roof as a result of so many people losing their job.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate, we've been saying that you know, the municipalities are on the front line. Most frontline workers work for municipality, or they may work for a provincially funded agency, but we feel like cities are absolutely on the front lines delivering every service. So much has been required of you, and you've had to improvise and make it all up as you go. It's interesting to me the extent to which some of the things that you've had to do might end up being things that would stick longer. You know, that there might be some changes that you may have made in dealing with the emergency that you think are probably the right thing to do. So, for instance, some of these we hear from mayors across the country who are putting homeless folks into motels and hotels. Are you thinking at the city about whether you should actually acquire some of these properties and create more supportive housing? Thoughts on that?
We are just at our last council meeting a week and a half ago. A motion was put forward. It was passed unanimously that directed staff to go and look at that exact issue of purchasing or leasing a hotel. It's come at a good time, if you could call it that, because a number of the hotels obviously have shut down because there's no one traveling from a tourism point of view. And as a result, we know that there are at least 2 hotels that are potentially for sale that would make a good investment. One of the hotels is a suite hotel, which has kitchenettes, because obviously we need some kitchen facilities. So we can't allow people just to live in a hotel room with no kitchen facilities. Mm-hmm. So our staff are looking at that now, coming back. They'll come back with a cost benefit analysis, how much work has to be done from a renovation point of view to make it more livable. But we think that's a very good idea because, quite frankly, the alternative is a crowded or overcrowded shelter system, living on the street, couch surfing, and those are not sustainable or good for the health and well-being, both mentally and physically, of our vulnerable citizens. So we're looking at that, and it's something I know that they've done aggressively in British Columbia, particularly in Vancouver, buying old hotels. We have to make sure that our partners at the provincial level are at the table as well with funding, both in terms of capital input as well as operating dollars, because many of these people, you simply can't just, here's a key, here's your room, and they need supports wrapped around them, and that requires operating dollars. So we're, excuse me, we're also even, speak of another aspect of our system is our transit system. Our transit ridership has plummeted like every other transit system in Canada. Yeah. We're down 80–85%. And yet we know that when businesses start to open and government offices start to open, people will be back on the system, and we need to deal with physical distancing, which is very difficult with a mass transit system, because the very nature of the word mass means it's a lot of people in a confined space. So we were the first transit commission in Canada to require, as of June 15th, mandatory wearing of masks in our trains and our bus system. And that's going to be a challenge because there'll be some people that forgot their mask, can't afford a mask, don't want to wear a mask. Mm-hmm. But we know that it's in everyone's best interest and self-interest to wear a mask to protect others and certainly to protect yourself. Mm-hmm. So we will go through that. We've also partnered with United Way, and they're going to be helping to hire people to sell masks and to use the funds to buy additional masks for those people who can't afford one or don't have one. So it's charitable giving, but you're getting something very valuable in return, and that is a mask to keep you and others on the bus and the train protected. So we have another, there's 14 or so different elements to the recovery plan for our transit system, including the mask program and sanitation centers at each of the main stations. Yeah.
Again, we're getting some interesting questions in the chat here about active transportation, alternative transportation. Back to this notion of, are there certain things that will be introduced during the crisis that could stick? And you just talked about acquiring hotels and motel beds. I think 30 years ago, you and I are old enough to remember 30 years ago that in New York City, when New York was hugely challenged in the 1990s, there were old, beautiful hotels there on Times Square. And a social entrepreneur working for Catholic Charities recognized that she could buy those hotels at a very minimal cost, turn them into supportive housing, and they've ended up being this extraordinary model. That's Roseanne Haggerty and her work with Common Ground and now with Community Solutions. So it was a time of crisis that ended up with a significant structural change that was a positive one. On transit, questions for you, I guess, about, obviously someone on the chat's asked this. I know a number of people asked this too. We're not taking fares now for transit, protecting the drivers and trying to make mobility easier. Do you think can you imagine a world where transit in Canada could be free?
Well, as you know, nothing is free in this world.
Right.
No cost. I always try to correct those people who say we want free transit. Well, unless the buses and gas are given to us free and our drivers become volunteers, no free transit.
Free for passengers.
Yeah, we have a policy of a roughly 50-50 split between fare box and taxpayers, and taxpayers also fund through other governments and ourselves 100% of the capital costs. So we're talking just the operating costs. I don't happen to support that. I know I'm not popular with some in the community who want everything for free or want everything at no cost. But there is a cost to taxpayers, and what we've tried to do is invest significantly in a multi-billion-dollar train system that no doubt has had its birthing pains in the first couple of months. Growing pains, like every new transit system. I talked to mayors of Toronto and Montreal, and TTC, has a major breakdown at least once a week, if not twice. And Montreal, same with their metro system. So we're in good company, but we're working with the reduced capacity now to really solve some of the functional problems that we've had. So what we've tried to do is we have one of the most generous community passes, or it's called an Equipass, for low-income individuals. That is half the price of a regular adult pass. So that is something that was introduced within the last year or so, including an Equifare, so that those people who are only paying by cash can pay 1/2, 50% off an adult passenger. And that, as I said, is one of the most generous and fares in the entire country. We also have a UPass system, which is for university and college students, which is, again, a significant deep discount from the regular adult fare. For our post-secondary institutions like Carleton, Ottawa U, Algonquin College, and Paul's University here in Ottawa. And what we're trying to do is to encourage more and more people, obviously, to take transit. It's, from a public policy point of view and environmental point of view, it's our single biggest tool in our toolkit to reduce our carbon footprint in GHGs, because the system is electric. The east-west RT is electric. So short answer is there may be some that would like us to eliminate fees and passes, but we'd have to find significant large amounts of money, and that the only source we have is the taxpayer. And it would equate to between a 12 and a 15% tax increase to Ottawa residents.
To their property tax.
To their property taxes, to get and as you know, the property tax system is probably the most regressive system of taxation. It doesn't really reflect one's ability to pay. You're often, through the assessment system, you're being taxed on an unrealized capital gain. I get my assessment of my house they say is valued at $400,000. Well, I'm not selling my house now. Why should I be assessed at that inflated level when maybe in a couple of years it will go back down or will go back up even more? So it's not the greatest way to fund organizations, that were originally set up to provide core basic services. We've taken on a lot more over the years because we've had to fill the void of cuts and downloading by other levels of government over the years and over the decades.
Well, let's talk about that for a sec, because you're a rare breed, I'm sure in all sorts of ways, but you're a rare breed in that you've also served at the provincial level. And in fact, you were Minister of Municipal Affairs. I don't know whether housing was with your ministry at that point. And I think it was on your watch that some uploading took place where some of the costs were actually, and I feel like we're now at another pivotal point here about thinking carefully about who does what and who pays for what. And as you suggest, it's been very clear during COVID that there are all sorts of things that municipal governments are obligated to do or are responsible for doing, or in this case, we're compelled to do because somebody had to, and you don't actually have sustainable revenue streams to do it. So based on your experience being in a provincial legislature and at a cabinet table, and now here's and there, how do you think this is going to shake out fundamentally? And we are very aware, this listenership on City Talk is very aware of the financial fiscal cliff that municipal governments are facing. So what's your thinking about how to get out of that?
Yeah, that's a good point you raised. You know, I think I've been fortunate to have worn a couple of hats over my career, including, you know, at one point president of Crown Corporation and Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and as mayor, both in the smaller city of Ottawa and the larger city of Ottawa. And the upload agreement, as we called it, was something that I was particularly proud of as minister, because during the Harris government, there was significant downloading to the municipal sector, and I was mayor at that time. So things like, you know, it's called Highway 174, for all intents and purposes, is a highway, but that was downloaded to the municipal sector, which has cost us millions of dollars to repave and rebuild and plow every year and so on. We were paying for the court security costs in the provincial courthouse. It had nothing to do with the city. It was Ontario's provincial courthouse right next to us here at City Hall. And we were paying Ottawa police officers to guard that particular facility. And the same with all the social services, which again, there's no direct correlation between the traditional role and responsibility of municipalities and social services. So we paid for portions of the Ontario Drug Plan, the Ontario Works Program, Ontario Disability Support Program. All of those costs were uploaded, including prisoner transportation and security. And it ended up saving municipalities, I think it was the total figure is about $1.2, $1.3 billion in savings, because the province took back those responsibilities. And in Ottawa's case, I think it was about $121 million. So it was a bit of a lifeline, but from a philosophical point of view, it was the right thing to do, not just because it saved property taxpayers money, because a lot of that money, for instance, in my first term, I committed to $16 million in new housing each year for the 4 years of that first term of office, using that upload money. So it wasn't used to give people tax breaks, it was used to invest in social infrastructure. And so now with COVID-19, we're seeing the challenges that we're facing. I was just on a Zoom call with the Provincial Minister of Health and Minister of Municipal Affairs and the Minister of Long-Term Care, all three meeting with us in our group called LUMCO, which is the Large Urban Mayors Caucus, to talk about funding opportunities, because we're a bit of a ping pong ball right now between the federal government and the provincial government. No one really wants to take responsibility, even though constitutionally it's the province. And you know, the federal government have been very good partners. They announced last week the gas tax will be made in one lump sum instead of spread over two. It's no new money, but at least it gets the money in our coffers and helps us with some cash flow, and obviously will generate some interest on the millions of dollars that are sent our way. But we need obviously to continue to push all levels of government, all orders of government, as we say, to ensure that we have the necessary tools to provide the programs that the public have come to expect. And so we know that there are going to be a lot of people dealing with hardship issues. Rent is a big issue, obviously, for people, both small businesses not being able to pay their rent for their stores, and individuals who are living in apartments or rooming houses, and the challenges they're facing. So, you know, even something as simple as our ambulance service, we have a real problem here, and it's not unique to Ottawa, or not unique to Ontario. It takes so long to get the offload of patients from a paramedic's ambulance to the hospital, and then they sit around there. So you go by one of our hospitals, there's 10 or 12 ambulances parked there waiting because they can't offload and get, you know, the necessary sign off from the hospital to allow them to go back out and do more work. And so we have several occasions where I think it's called code black or code Orange, where there's no ambulances in the entire city available because they're all doing
They're all
things.
full.
So I raised that with the minister today, and she understood it's a problem in our city, but it's a problem province-wide. And those are the kinds of things where there are these joint partnerships where, the ambulance service is 75% funded by the province and 25% by the city. We have public health, for instance. Before this pandemic, the current provincial government cut public health. We managed to sort of lobby them. I worked with John Tory and others to sort of get some of the cuts reinstated. But we're going to have a serious discussion with the province that you can't go and cut public health because it's played such an important role in the fight against COVID-19. And I think most people realize that the men and women, the doctors and nurses of public health have been doing a remarkable job under very challenging circumstances. But we can't undermine their good work by underfunding that good work.
This is sort of a fundamental question, though, Mayor, because and I want to call you minister at the same time, and because you have both sides of your brain engaged with this. But it is one of the challenges, also, though, that the province had the authority to cut public health. Because the dilemma is, if you had other revenue tools within your municipal purview and you had standards, let's say, that the province gave to you that you had to comply with, then how you resource your public health department would be your call. And you would have the money to be able to have a public health department that was able to respond to the needs of your local community. Is that just not possible to imagine?
Well, I think one of the things that we're going to have a long look at after all of the health issues have subsided, and we don't know when the virus is going to leave or whether it will ever leave.
Right.
It's like flu. We have a flu shot every year, but hundreds of people die of the flu. I think we need to better understand the division of responsibilities. I was talking to a colleague today. Health is everyone has their fingers in that pot. You've got public health at the local level, the provincial government has health, the federal government, Aboriginal health.
Yeah.
Very poorly coordinated and a lot of duplication. We have out here in Ottawa, Health Canada, there's building after building in an area called Tunney's Pasture filled with people that are part of Health Canada. And then you have the same thing in Toronto at Queen's Park. Thousands of people filling a building there, and then you have local health here, and then you have hospitals that are run by boards of directors. So if you were designing this from scratch, it would not be designed the way we have it right now, because too many people are involved and there's too much duplication of effort. So now is not the time to have that discussion because we're in the midst of dealing with the crisis. But I think we have to have that discussion, and it has to be properly funded. One of the things I also happen to be the first Minister of Health Promotion in the province of Ontario, and it was dealing with the determinants of health from the front end instead of constantly sending people into what I call the sickness system, namely the hospital, which is the most expensive care in the whole triage movement of healthcare. Let's make sure that we do things like bring in the Smoke-Free Ontario Act to reduce smoking rates. Bring in a healthy eating, active living strategy, an injury prevention strategy. Make sure that people are more physically fit, that kids have an opportunity to have a daily gym class and so on, so that you can deal with some of the fundamental issues of obesity. We've seen a 300% increase in obesity rates in North America amongst kids in the last 25 years. Mm-hmm. And you see it on the streets, you see it in the fast food restaurants, and that ends up clogging the healthcare system, clogging your heart, but clogging the healthcare system with health issues, diabetes, certain forms of cancer. So, sometimes people say, oh, it's just a nanny state. One of the things I'm most proud of as minister was bringing in getting past the Smoke-Free Ontario Act, because we know that has saved lives, both from reducing smoking levels, increasing smoking cessation, and protecting those workers in bars and restaurants that were subjected to going into a blue haze of smoke. Remember the old days? We're both old enough to remember that's the smoking section, that's not the smoking section. It's crazy. There's no divide. And I remember telling my niece one day that you used to be able to smoke on an airplane. Remember you'd have a smoking section?
I remember.
There was a little curtain.
I had smoking parents. And smoking in cars, I know. So, Mayor, let's go back to the jurisdiction you now serve in. As I suggested, you're a very important asset because you actually have understandings of how the other system works, just like your colleague Mayor Savage has sat at the federal table. So it's important that we have these multi-level experience. But if we go to the areas where you actually have jurisdiction and you have capacity to make changes, what about this idea that we're seeing in other cities around turning streets over to more pedestrian use, repurposing lanes, adding more bike lanes, all that kind of stuff? How are you imagining going forward on that in terms of the lessons we can derive from this, and anything that you think that can stick?
Well, yeah, again, I think there are some in our community that feel that I have not done enough on that, but we're in a bit of a different situation. We have something called the NCC, which is the National Capital Commission, which I now sit on the board of directors of, along with the Mayor of Gatineau. And they have a number of parkways, which are the ideal roadways to convert to cycling. So they've done that, for instance, the Queen Elizabeth driveway, which cuts right through the downtown core, has been shut down for the last couple of weeks. And then on weekends, they're shutting down the Sir John A. Macdonald Parkway and the Sir George Etienne Cartier Parkway in different parts of the city. Some councillors have we created a traffic calming budget for each member of council, and some have used those to block off certain streets. In some instances, I think it's worked well. In other instances, it hasn't been as well received. But in the last term of council, we invested a record amount, about $80 million in cycling initiatives. We just opened the Flora Footbridge a couple of years ago, named after Flora MacDonald, who was Canada's first female foreign affairs minister, and she used to skate. She was a speed skater along the canal. So this beautiful bridge for cyclists and pedestrians that connects two great communities, Old Ottawa East and the Glebe. So, I know other cities are moving forward with various temporary and some permanent structures. We have a cycling plan. We have funding in place for it. We'll continue to make cycling more safe. We know, for instance, that we were the first city in Ontario to create an urban, in the urban core, to create a segregated bike lane. I can almost see it from my office window here on Laurier Avenue, and then another one on O'Connor going north-south, and Laurier goes east-west. And that was, a lot of businesses didn't want that, but it's worked out really well. And we were proud to be the first one in the province to have that kind of a segregated lane in an urban setting.
You're talking about all the forms of connective tissue. This is the business we say COIs in, but you're talking about the actual tangible forms of connective tissue that allow us to be mobile in the city. And with more and more people working from home, and we're hearing reports of large companies making it clear that their employees can continue to work from home indefinitely. Do you have a sense of how that's going to affect your allocation of resources within the city? You have a vibrant commercial sector. Any thoughts on how that's going to affect that area of the city, and are there going to be ways you're going to have to adjust services, for instance, in different parts of the different neighborhoods?
Yeah, it's a very good point. Shopify, which again I can look at across the street here, is a great Canadian success story. I think it's the most valuable company now, even more than the Royal Bank, I heard the other day. They announced that they're shutting their offices until next year. Mostly everyone is working from home. And we've heard from the federal government that there will probably be a lot more people working from home than in the past because it's worked out well. In some instances, it probably hasn't. There may be productivity issues and so on. We've gone through these cycles a lot because a government will come in and slash 20,000 public servants, empty out buildings in the downtown core, and then another government comes in and adds 20 or 22,000.
Yes, you're used to it. Yeah.
So we're used to the up and down. Yeah. That's why we're trying to strengthen the high-tech sector and the tourism hospitality sectors to balance off the peaks and valleys of government whim. 1 minute we're going to hire and the next we're not. And then, governments have decentralized some of the work still in Ottawa, but for instance, the RCMP is down in the south end of the city, their headquarters, and National Defense is down at the old Nortel site in the west end of the city. But there always will be a vibrant downtown because Parliament Hill is here, and you need that apparatus around Parliament Hill to make sure that the members and the ministers and so on are served well. So I'm not sure at the end of the day, a company decides they're going to work from home, if that's going to work. And, I think we're social animals as human beings. We want some interaction. I'm discovering myself, I work maybe 2 days a week from home and 3 days here at City Hall. I'm going stir crazy, at home all the time, because you procrastinate, maybe I'll go in the bathtub now, and you're not focused.
Too much. Yeah, I was actually. You cook too much. I was actually.
Well, I eat too much.
Or you eat too much. I was going to tease you about whether you'd taken those flags home with you that were behind you, but we realized when we were setting up that you were actually in your office.
But I think the impact it has is a couple-fold. One, obviously, the economic impact of people going and buying lunch and dinner and so on downtown. That's going to impact some of those businesses. And it will impact our ridership numbers on transit, because the whole purpose of us investing billions of dollars into LRT is to get people in and out of the city as quickly and as efficiently as possible. So if we have fewer people, that means we're losing money. Now, to give you a perspective, every mayor has their own number. Our number is we're losing $1 million a day. And that's primarily as a result of loss of revenue from transit box, as well as our recreation programs. They've all been shut down. We're not offering skating lessons and swim class and so on.
Right. In terms of back to this notion of how things might shift or change, it seems to me that you've done a remarkable job. Ottawa's evolved. When I was younger, Ottawa was was like a company town. And it didn't have the kind of vibrancy that it's got now. It didn't have the tech sector particularly, but it didn't have you have a lot of entrepreneurial businesses. You have interesting restaurants. We've been watching, we have a thing that COI produced, most City Talkers will know about it, called citysharecanada.ca. And it's a place where people put up and crowdsource every day. New ideas come up there about things that are being done. And we had seen some of the support programs that were existing for your restaurants, and that you've started some local delivery services. And it's all pretty fantastic how people are self-organizing to sort of address this differently. In terms of your economy and having it becoming more diverse, you've been dependent on tourism. And I'm interested how do you imagine that? How are you going to make that shift over the next several months when the border may still be closed to Americans or travelers coming from other countries? Any thoughts on that?
It's a huge challenge. I had the honor of being the president of the Canadian Tourism Commission, which is the federal crown corporation that promoted Canada as a tourism destination.
Right.
And we really hit our stride in 2017. We put a lot of effort and financial resources into the sesquicentennial celebration to really go to the next level of tourism promotion. We had a banner year, and then we worked really hard. And the next couple of years after that, we did even better, in terms of hotel occupancy, airport arrivals, and so on. So our team at Ottawa Tourism, Michael Crockett, the president there, and his entire team did a great job. We were one of the first cities to introduce the municipal accommodation tax, which funds Ottawa Tourism, which has been a godsend to them. But obviously, if people don't stay in hotels, as has been the case, they've been hit financially in terms of their ability to go out and market. So in the short term, we're going to market, obviously, Montreal-Toronto corridor, 1 or 2 day trips, trying to get people from those two large cities who don't want to travel too far afield to get here, and build on the success that we've had as, all of the national institutions when they open up again, whether it's, Parliament buildings or, the National Gallery, the National Arts Center, the War Museum, the Museum of Nature, and some of our local museums as well. So tourism is our third largest industry in Ottawa. People think of Ottawa as a government town. You're quite right about that. But Money Sense magazine, a national publication, listed us 2 years in a row as the best city to live in, raise a family, the quality of life, the safety people have here. It really is a beautiful city. We have a great partnership with Gatineau, for instance, across the river. The mayor, Maxime Pinot-Jobin, and I have a very good working relationship and worked on a lot of joint projects because we're really one economic region that's divided by the Ottawa River. we're looking, the festivals that we have in our city. We now have over 100 festivals. And unfortunately, most of them to date have been canceled. Our biggest festival, Blues Fest, was canceled. Our Tulip Festival, which was going to mark the 75th anniversary of the liberation of all Holland, and Princess Marguerite was scheduled to be here last week. And she was born, of course, in Ottawa during World War II, and her family sought refuge here. A lot of history between the Dutch and ourselves. But those festivals, we made a decision to keep funding them at the same level, even though they didn't put on a festival, because they had built-in fixed costs.
Oh, that's great.
If we'd pulled the funding, because we'd say, well, you didn't put a festival on, you're not going to get the money, they would have gone bankrupt. So we're pushing the province and the federal government to do the same thing, because we need to keep the infrastructure and the talent and the professionals of these organizations together so they can start planning next year's festival and not realize that they can't keep planning because they have no money to pay salaries or office.
Well, and in the same way that the wage subsidy was designed so that employers would not have to lay their staff off and then start from ground zero when they came back. Well, that was smart of you. And we've been having one of our city talks yesterday was on culture and the future of the cultural sector, and the idea that these organizations are redefining themselves too, and figuring out, can they create a digital presence, but also someone was raising on the session yesterday about museums. Can they start to make their content and their programming and exhibits locally focused, so that locals will come in? And I am quite familiar with the Ottawa Art Gallery and the remarkable work that they've been doing there to try to create a partnership with the local community. So
that's a great, that's a great example. Thank you for mentioning. I'm looking at the one of the things holding up the screen is the Ottawa Art Gallery book. Will all become stories.
Great.
And not out of disrespect, but I see it every day when I'm doing one of these calls. But I'm really proud of the Ottawa Art Gallery. That was one of my pet projects that we've been working on for a long time, and the board and staff and Alex at the OAG have put together a world-class municipal art gallery that is free of charge, open 7 days a week, obviously not now during COVID. And it's another example of the renaissance and rebirth of our downtown core. We have LRT that goes into the downtown core. You take the train, and 2-minute walk, and you're at the Ottawa Art Gallery. Go in free of charge. Look at one of the greatest collection, group of 7 paintings in Canada, if not the world, because this generous family, the Firestone family, donated their entire collection of art to the Ottawa Art Gallery. We have the national institutions. We have the Byward Market, which is the oldest continuous market. And you mentioned restaurants. We've got, some amazing chefs, world-class chefs that are being drawn to the culinary scene. When I arrived in Ottawa to go to university, I joked with friends. I said, the closest thing to European cuisine in Ottawa was Swiss Chalet. And I love Swiss Chalet. I order it at least once a week. But we needed to up the game, and we have some great restaurants, and the culinary scene employs a lot of people. And we also have, most people don't realize, Ottawa is, can you go get the map for me? I'm just going to show you a map. I had our staff put together a map. We're a big, large, rural community, believe it or not. 82% of Ottawa is rural, forest and agriculture. We have 1,100.
What percentage?
82% of Ottawa, because we have this massive green belt.
Like Halifax.
Plus we have 1,100 farms, believe it or not. And we have one of the largest solar farms, for instance. And I had our staff pull this together. I don't know if we'll be able to see it. We superimposed, come on in here. We superimposed the cities of Calgary, Edmonton, Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. All of those cities fit within the boundaries of Ottawa, and we're still bigger than those 5 cities by 100 square kilometers.
My gosh, what a great map. Thank you to your able assistant there.
This is Liam, So there's, give you an example. This is Calgary, which is 826 square kilometers. This is one municipal ward called West Carleton, where there are 26,000 people live there. Calgary has 1.2 million. I said there are more cows than people. Thanks, Liam. There's more cows than people in West Carleton. So it gives you an idea of the challenge of planning a city that has a very distinct urban core, suburban core, and these wonderful rural villages where you can go out to a cranberry farm, or you can go into Vanier, which is a wonderful francophone community. They have a working sugar shack for cabine à sucre. You can go into, see, as I said, see one of the largest solar farms. We have 1,100 working farms in the city of Ottawa, and it makes it quite a unique city to live in and to visit. And that's one of the things we're working with the tourism industry. How do we work with the cycling groups to create rural cycling opportunities to bring people out to these beautiful little villages that have their own cafes, bed and breakfast, and so on, and create the staycation concept to help get some of the money back into circulation. And we're, I think, in probably better shape than a lot of other cities because we have the stability of the federal public service where people have continued to work from home and collect a paycheck, plus retirees. We're counting on them once the economy opens up again. Get out there and spend money, go to restaurants, go to boutiques, don't buy everything online from a company in the States, support the local businesses that create the jobs, that sponsor the kids' hockey teams, that really, make a Main Street or Bank Street or Queen Street or Elgin or the Byward Market or Rideau Street the vibrant places they are.
Yeah, your map is a huge hit here on the chat. So I hope that our staff will tee up with your able assistant there who just brought the map out, and we'll tweet that out, folks, so everybody has it. It really is a great map. We had Mayor Savage on a couple of weeks ago, same slot, and he was saying the same thing, that the region of Halifax incorporates a lot of rural areas as well. So that's obviously a challenge for you in terms of land use and planning, but also transit and connectivity and all the extra challenges. But as you say, there's a plus side to it. We're kind of moving into the home stretch here with you, Mayor Watson, because I know you have important things you have to get to, and we appreciate you taking the time. One thing that we have a project at CUI that we're working with a gazillion partners on called Bring Back Main Street. And one of the challenges that we're aware of is that Main Street businesses, local businesses, are often anchored by academic institutions. Mm-hmm. And you have several in Ottawa, and it's not clear whether they're bringing students back, what the long-term arrangements are going to be for those places. They often have lots and lots of physical space with classrooms. Are you guys thinking much about that in Ottawa, about what the fall is going to look like if those universities aren't actually back functioning in the way they've traditionally done?
Yeah, I don't know if final decisions have been taken. I know a lot of the universities, particularly my alma mater, Carleton University, has indicated that good majority, I believe, of their classes will be online. So that has an impact, obviously, in terms of the quality of education, I think, but also, we welcome tens of thousands of students to come into the city. They rent apartments, they live in residence, they shop locally, and they're part of the community. And I remember years ago seeing a statistic, something like 60% of students who go to a university in Ottawa end up staying here because they fall in love with someone, or they fall in love with the city, or they get a job and they want to stay here. And
it's a great recruitment. It's a great urban recruitment method. Yeah, what's going to happen to that? Yeah.
But it adds to the vibrancy. I used to live very close to Carleton University, and every once in a while you get a little rowdy party, for the Panda game and so on. But most of the time, they were great contributors, and that's going to have a significant hit to the economy, the local economy. Not so much, I think, for the universities, because they're still going to have the students paying tuition, obviously, but it's going to be a different education. How do you have an orientation online, and how do you have that kind of fun and social interaction with other students to meet them from around the world? Because our universities and colleges attract students from around the world to come and learn at some of these great institutions. So it's a big problem. I've had some discussions with the presidents of the universities, but I think they're struggling to find a way, how do they educate these people without them necessarily being physically in the city of Ottawa? Mm-hmm. And it's the same with the residences. There are thousands of residence rooms. If everything's going to be online, there's no reason for you to come and move here, and they're probably not open residences if they're not required, and that has an implication for layoffs in the food services sector as well.
I guess there's questions too about are there temporary uses then for those academic facilities. I mean, I know that in the city of Calgary, for instance, when they built the new library and then were renovating City Hall, it meant that there were some, right on the main street, one of the main streets downtown, it left some empty office space, and then the University Department of Planning actually moved in. So during these times of transition, maybe we're going to see different kinds of repurposing, maybe only on a temporary basis of these larger shared spaces, eh?
Yeah, it could be. You know, we mentioned earlier the Ottawa Art Gallery. We actually partnered with the Ottawa University of Ottawa, and they have a lecture hall and classrooms as part of the footprint of the Ottawa Art Gallery. So I know that universities, because so many students are applying to come to U of O, Algonquin, L'Cité, St. Paul's, Carleton University, that they're bursting at the seams, and you know, they need this space. But the reality is that it's really uncertain because we're still in this state of emergency, both provincially and locally. And there are limitations in terms of what we can and can't do, and we have to respect the physical distancing that the public health officials are telling us is the best way for us to battle COVID-19.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, we are almost out of time, Mayor Watson. So in terms of today, believe it or not, is day 80. 2 weeks from now will be COVID at 100. That'll be 100 days since the WHO declared it the pandemic a global emergency. So as you're heading into COVID 100 and COVID 200, presumably, is there one particular thing that you're having to double down on as the Mayor of Ottawa that is really top of your mind right now? I'm sure there's many up there, but can you just pick one to finish on?
Yeah, I think really the doing everything we can humanly possible to keep the message fresh, even though it's often the same message and people are starting to get fatigued with 2 meters and wear a mask and wash your hands. We have to continue that, because unfortunately that's the only way that we know to stop the spread. There's no vaccine at this point. And while it's frustrating, I think, for people and kids, when initially the parks were closed and playground equipment is off limits, I'm not a parent, so I don't have any idea of how difficult it is to have your kids at home 24/7. But we need to respect the wise advice of our medical officers of health in all parts of Canada. What's been impressive is that generally all 3 orders of government have worked well together. We put partisanship aside by and large, which I think the public would expect of us. I have a very good, philosophically, I'm not in the same realm as Doug Ford, but he and I have a very good relationship. I texted him 2 nights ago and he got back to me on the phone. We had a good conversation about a couple of issues that we're facing, and same with the Prime Minister. So, they've put partisanship aside, and I think that's for the betterment of our communities and our society as we head down these very much uncharted waters.
Yeah, I mean, and then there's all sorts of practical things that just have to get fixed. And I guess there's not a lot of time, or nobody has bandwidth for too much partisanship. We just have to get them solved, don't we?
That's true.
One of the healthy things about urban leadership, I think, in municipal governments is that generally you're not constrained by, at least in Canada, by parties or party politics, and you just kind of get it done. So we appreciate you very much taking time with us. As I suggested at the outset, we're aware that many people living in urban environments in Canada are feeling an emotional sense of precarity, economic precarity, social precarity, and now the issues of systemic racism are really on the surface for folks. So we appreciate how do we build collective empathy? How do we actually move to a place of a more just community, a more just and equitable city? So that's the path we're on. We appreciate the leadership of mayors like you, and we appreciate how much municipal governments have just had to step up and be on the front line and make it up. It's kind of a DIY city these days, and we appreciate your leadership. So thank you for joining us. Next week on City Talk, folks, we have 4. It's another super week for CUI. We've got 4 sessions. On Wednesday, we're going, Jay Pitter is taking over the chair here. She's been working with CUI for a number of weeks, and she's hosting a session with participants from the United States and Canada on how do we respond to anti-Black racism in urbanist practices and conversations. Really critical conversation that I hope you'll join CUI for, and Jay and her colleagues, Wednesday noon. Then Thursday, we have a session called How Do We Ensure Equitable Access to Parks and Public Space, and that's in partnership with Park People. And we have people coming in from Paris, where they really have struggled with equitable access to public space and have a lot of hard-won lessons there, and other parts of, and that Thursday session is at 1. Just heads up, everyone will get the email they usually get on Monday morning, but I'm just telling you so you can mark your calendars now. That's Thursday at 1, Wednesday at 12 with Jay. And then we have a Super Mayor Week next week. Mayor Watson, 2 of your colleagues are coming on with us. On Friday, Mayor Nenshi will be with us at noon to talk to us about his perspective from Calgary. And on Tuesday, we will have Mayor Tory, John Tory from Toronto, with us at noon. So next week's a big week for COI, and it's a big week for us to come to terms with the realities of urban Canada. So thank you so much, Mayor Watson, for joining us, and we wish you a good weekend. I wish everyone a safe weekend and a thoughtful weekend. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.